Welcome back to the Dark Manor podcast. I'm Hayden.
I'm excellent.
And today we are reading two stories, Herobrine and the Virtual Reality Experiment. The only one we're actually familiar with is Herobrine.
Really? What's Herobrine?
You son of a bitch.
I've lied to you the whole time.
I'm going to be reading Herobrine. David's going to read the Virtual Reality Experiment.
Because hell yeah, VR.
Yeah. We're big fans of VR.
Yeah.
So, Herobrine doesn't need that much background information other than it's Minecraft.
Yep.
So, let's just jump into it.
No.
Herobrine. I had recently
spawned it.
Fuck you. Herobrine.
I had recently spawned.
Shut up, David! You're reading Virtual Reality Experiment. I'm reading Herobrine. I had recently spawned into a new world in single-player Minecraft. Everything was normal at first as I began chopping down trees and crafting a workbench.
It's called a crafting table?
Back in beta, it was called a workbench.
I know.
I noticed something move against the dense fog. I have a very slow computer, so I have to play with a tiny render distance.
That's in parentheses.
Yeah. I thought it was a cow, so I pursued it, hoping to grab some hides for armor. It wasn't a cow, though. Looking back at me was another character with the default skin, but his eyes were empty. I saw no name pop up, and I double-checked to make sure I wasn't in a multiplayer mode. He didn't stay long. He looked at me and quickly ran into the fog. I pursued out of curiosity, but he was gone. I continued on with the game, not sure what to think. As I expanded the world, I saw things that seemed out of place for the random map generator to make. 2x2 tunnels in the rocks, small perfect pyramids made of sand in the ocean, and grooves of trees with all their leaves cut off.
Groves.
Oh, groves of trees with all their leaves cut off.
Groove has two O's.
I would constantly think I saw the other player in the deep fog, but I never got a better look at him. I tried increasing my render distance too far whenever I thought I saw him, but to no avail. I saved the map and went on the forums to see if anyone else has found the same pseudo player. There was none. I created my own topic, telling of the man and asking if anyone had a similar experience. The post was deleted within 5 minutes. I tried again, and the topic was deleted even faster. I received a PM from username Herobrine, containing one word. Stop. When I went to look at Herobrine's profile, the page 404'd. I received an email from another forum user. He claimed the mods can read the forum user messages, so we were safe for using email. The emailer claimed that he had seen the mystery player too, and had a wacky directory of other users who had seen him as well. Their worlds were littered with obviously man-made features as well, and described their mystery player to have no pupils. About a month passed until I heard from my informant again. Some of the people who had encountered the mystery man had looked into the name Herobrine and found that name to be frequently used by a Swedish gamer. After some further information gathering, it was revealed to be the brother of Notch, the game developer. I personally emailed Notch and asked him if he had a brother. It took him a while, but he mailed me back with a very short message. I did, but he's no longer with us. Notch. I haven't seen the mystery man since our first encounter, and I haven't noticed any changes to the world other than my own. I was able to press the print screen when I first saw him. Here's the only evidence of his existence. And then there's just a screenshot of... Oh, yep, Herobrine's in that image. I was
When I looked at the picture, I can tell that it's obviously fake.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like, now that I'm looking at it, knowing a lot more about
We're not.
Photography and shit.
Yeah, we're not fucking 9. We know it's not real.
Yeah. Sadly.
You know how Minecraft does those like April Fool's Day jokes?
Yeah.
I'm surprised one of their April Fool's Day jokes hasn't been adding Herobrine to Minecraft for a day.
Honestly, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. But we got mods.
Or just adding like what Herobrine does, but no sign of like Herobrine itself.
Yeah. Well, my verdict is at 9, this was scary as hell, and I believed it when I was a kid. But
who doesn't believe Herobrine exists to a point, you know?
But looking back at it, there's a lot of evidence as why he's not real. You know, Notch never had a brother. He's publicly said that. Mm-hmm. Plus the fact that why would his brother be haunting Notch's game? Plus, why on the forum would he make an account called Herobrine just to say stop and forward him?
Well, yeah, at the same time, it forward, so it existed but never existed.
Overall, 4 out of 10.
4 out of 10.
That's generous for me.
I would give it an 8 out of 10. It's a classic.
Okay, I gave it a 4 out of 10 mostly for nostalgia purposes, because if I were to never hear of Herobrine until reading that blog post, the creepypasta, I wouldn't believe it for a second.
Why?
Just doing a little bit of research nowadays disproves it.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't have believed it at all.
Well, for me, it's still 8 out of 10. You know, it's a classic. It made me shit myself when I was younger. You know, one of the best originals.
Also 4 out of 10 because I tried to summon Herobrine when I was a kid and it didn't work. Herobrine, please respond to my texts. Anyway, here's on to the next story, the virtual reality experiment. We have never heard of this.
Yep.
So,
I'm the one reading it.
Yep. So, David, give it a whirl.
Virtual reality experiment.
A few years
ago,
before
at the time of this writing, there was an experiment. Yeah, I'm not gonna let you get that chance. It was an experiment to test a phenomenal invention. It was a test. If the test was successful, it would have potentially revolutionized the world of video games forever. The invention was a virtual reality gaming console that would actually put eager players into the game so they could vividly experience it instead of just play it. It sounded like something from unrealistic science fiction, but the developers had spent years building it and made sure it was ahead of the rest of the gaming industry by far.
Dude, that's just a quest.
The console was to be called the Immersion, and it would have instantly made every other console obsolete. It wasn't like the kind of system where you would have to wear a visor over your eyes like the Oculus Rift and still hold a controller. It would have generated an entire virtual world unlike any other before it for players to experience or to explore. So like Sword Art Online.
Yeah.
The Nerf gear in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
The game would generate sounds, smells, sights, and even a temperature. Once the gamer began playing, it was as if they had stepped into another world for an adventure. Sometimes the game would give them items to use. There would be people inside the game to interact with. People who would wander around the world, heroes, villains, and neutrals. The game would create situations and the player would have to solve them. The immersion actually put the player into the story. It was an advanced piece of technology, far beyond today's limitations, and it held a certain tempting beauty to it that attracted almost every major business to hear of it. The way the immersion worked was by getting into your head. Basically, the system would put you in a sleep-like condition and control the dreams you have.
Okay, it's just a nerve gear.
Yeah, basically, it sounds exactly like how the nerve gear and hemisphere work in SAO.
Okay, I'll talk about what's going on in this paragraph after you're done reading, because there's some BS going on.
Yeah, I want to talk a bit about, like, the background. Anyways. It was a complicated and very sophisticated device. The only thing players had as a controller was a helmet over their heads for the machine to work. Oh. Anyone who was wearing the helmet should have only moved a little bit while playing the game, and the curious sensation known as sleepwalking, similar to how they would in an actual slumber. If you had died or lost in the game, then the immersion would simply wake you up.
No, so it's not the nerve gear.
Well, it kind of is. There's just that instead.
Q.
They definitely got this from like SAO.
Yeah, definitely. Because hold on, I'm gonna see where this. You continue reading.
The first comment was in 2014, so
and
that's
afterwards.
That's sometime after SAO came out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. There we go. Only 3 games were made for the immersion, and the games took almost as much time to make as the console itself. Tests were required to make sure the game worked properly, so researchers hired to examine the console. However, developers wanted to keep the invention a secret so that no other company could steal their idea or make a console to rival the immersion, which was highly unlikely. The researchers found 3 people to play the 3 games developed for the system. The games were Mark, Luke, and Wayne. And each of them was a devoted gamer. Bruce Wayne. The researchers let them pick the games they played after an explanation about the game. There was a game called War World, which was a shooting game. Hell yeah. The player would have started in a helicopter wearing a full standard issue army uniform. They had just enough time to look around the sleek back interior of the helicopter with the pilot and co-pilot chairs in the front, a wooden crate next to the player on the floor, and the door to the helicopter wide open, revealing a height so high the ground was scarcely invisible. After a moment of looking around, the pilot would told them to grab a parachute, a gun from the crate, and then to jump out of the helicopter. Okay, that's just me being stupid. The immersion would have made it all the more terrifying than pressing a button and walking forward. It would make the player smell the air at the high altitude and feel the overpowering strength of the helicopter blades as they stood in the doorway, staring down at the earth where a layer of dust concealed the ground. And then the player would fall from the helicopter just before a missile was fired to shoot the helicopter down behind them as they fell to the ground. The player would actually feel the heat of the explosion scraping their back.
That's got to be a safety hazard, don't you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of like SAO. I don't think the person's actual body is damaged.
Yeah, but they feel the pain.
Yeah, in the game, but not outside of the game. Hold on. And then the player will fall from the helicopter before the missile. Okay. The explosion would have been I don't know how to speak. The explosion would have been deafeningly loud. Fuck me. And scattered flaming helicopter pieces everywhere. The player would then have to pull the ripcord of the parachute to land in the middle of a war zone with the gun they chose. Each soldier, friendly or enemy, would have custom faces, different stories and personalities, and different techniques. This was the game Mark would play. How did I know it would be Mark? The next game was titled Diesel Drag, a racing game. It started with the player walking through a tunnel onto a racetrack, where there would be lines of race cars arranged, all different types and models. All the player had to do was climb inside one and turn the key in the ignition, and then all the other cars would suddenly have drivers in them, ready to race. There had been plenty of tracks designed. The racetracks ranged from NASCAR-type tracks to a forest drive to wild public racing through a city. The immersion also had created a world off the racetrack in case the player went off-road. The NASCAR track had spectators watching around outside the boundaries. The forest had trees and woodland animals, and the city had individual shops with different people inside. This is the game that Luke would play. The third and final game developed for the immersion was the most vivid of them all. The developers saw an opportunity to make a horror game, an actual scary one unlike any made before, and they decided to make one for the immersion. Hours of time went into making the monster look intimidating and frightening. The weeks went into creating how he would believe in the game, or behave in the game. This game was called The Aberrant. The player would begin strapped to a table, and they would find their arms tied down. If they struggled, the player would find their right arm was loose and possible to twist out of the binds. The room was empty, aside from the table. Looking around, the player would see the room was a perfect square with stone walls and an iron door. After about 20 seconds, a white-haired man would enter the room with a long butcher knife. If the player was free or nearly free, he would attack. If the player appeared to be still strapped down, he would stand over them and began whispering on how much he would love to see the blade enter their flesh and other psychotic things such as this. To make this moment even creepier, a few developers had extended conversations had extended conversations with murderous asylum inmates who had stabbed victims to death, only to get a feel for the emotion required for this man. The player could overpower the man and knock him to the ground or push past him and escape. Either way, they had to get out of the room. Once they had escaped the room, the old man would call after them just before the iron door slammed shut. "You can't escape! Come back or he will find you!" He turned out to be the monster. The player's goal was to navigate their way through a maze-like cave system while avoiding it. The developers had made sure to put plenty of obstacles, objects, and details into the maze. There were broken chairs to throw at the monster to slow it down, large tree roots going out of the walls to force the player to climb over or slide under, and piles of rocks and gravel to hide behind. But the monster was unrelenting in his bloodthirsty search. Wayne, who was apparently a horror addict, had practically begged to play the game. With every researcher and developer gathered in a large room, Mark, Luke, and Wayne were strapped down to 3 tables before the immersion helmets were placed over their heads. A button was pressed, and the games were started. God. Within a minute, all 3 gamers had fallen into a sleep-like state, occasionally mumbling about "shoot that one" or "pass him," or sometimes kicking slightly. The immersion helmets were hooked up to 3 large television screens, so everybody could see what the gamer saw in a first-person view. It's like watching a YouTube video. It's like a live stream. The experiment was going almost exactly as planned, so developers and researchers alike were prepared to celebrate. But then their celebration was cut tragically short. The gamers began to thrash around. Mark, who had been in the middle of shooting an enemy soldier with his machine gun in War World, was now screaming, his cries growing in pitch every time he stopped to take a breath. Terrified researchers jumped back as blood began to spurt from Mark's body. Small wounds that looked to be bullet holes had covered Mark's chest, and his screams began to die. In only a few moments, Mark had turned from an avid gamer into a bullet-hole-filled corpse. Luke was jerking side to side. His car in the game was going off the track, and he was fighting to keep it on. He might have succeeded, but suddenly another race car came along and knocked him off the track. Luke had told the developers to put it on the forest track, and the same track where the developers had chosen to put a large, fenceless cliff overlooking a long hill. Luke's car spun over and over again as it rolled off the steep cliff and down the hill. The car went into midair for a moment and then hit the ground with a terrible screech of metal. Luke's sleeping body quivered for a moment, and then there was a loud cracking sound as his neck snapped, along with a few other bones. All was still, and then the car exploded. Luke's body erupted into flames, and the researchers were astounded at this sudden spontaneous human combustion. A few ran for the fire extinguisher, but all that remained of Luke was a black hunk of meat and burning smell.
Yum.
At this point, burnt steak, how I like it. At this point, developers and researchers alike were trying to stop the game Wayne was playing. If they had simply pulled off his helmet, Wayne's brain might have been permanently damaged. They couldn't turn off the game and could only watch Wayne play. Wayne's arm had been cut while escaping the old man in the beginning of the game, and a thick gash appeared in reality, staining his shirt sleeve with blood. After escaping the old man, Wayne was now running for his life down the caves. The monster's roar echoed behind him in the distant darkness at the end of the tunnel. Wayne found himself in a large open area. He looked around for a few seconds, and then came the sound of thundering footsteps. He cast a quick, frightened glance to the dark tunnel he had just emerged from, and then looked around the area again. There was a large rock over to the side, and Wayne quickly scrambled behind it. He froze, trying not to even breathe, as the footsteps entered the room. There was the sound of the monster sniffing. Wayne stared at the ground, hardly daring to move the slightest bit. The monster stopped, and there was silence. Wayne cautiously began to raise his head to look up at the top of the rock. There was no sound. Suddenly, a large, clawed hand shot down from over the top of the rock. There was a loud growl, and Wayne screamed. The claws managed to seize him around the neck and pulled him from his hiding spot. In reality, Wayne's body opened up with more scratches, leaking even more blood. The monster hoisted him into the air and then threw him into the ground. Wayne looked up and got a glimpse of the monster. His face resembled a human skull, having 2 dark eyes and a stubby nose. The eyes held 2 green orbs that cut through Wayne like hunter's eyes. The monster had a mouth like a gaping chasm with long, sharp teeth. Its body was large and brown with long legs. Long appendages grew from under its arms, wrapping around Wayne and pulling him into the air upside down. Wayne screamed and put his arms in front of him as some sort of defense, and then the monster's mouth opened wide and pulled Wayne into itself before its mouth closed, chomping the man as though he were nothing more than a piece of bread. In reality, Wayne's body fell open, exposing a few broken skull and meaty insides.
A few broken skull?
Yeah. Or exposing a broken skull and meaty insides. Shit. Anyways. His lifeless eyes still remained in his head, staring out of the holes in his skull. A few people vomited. In the game, the monster threw Wayne down. The green lights in its eyes dimmed, reducing them to pure black. The monster on the TV screen looked right at the developers with its dark holes, and then thick black sludge began to fall from its eyes onto the floor. Its mouth slowly fell open, releasing even more of the sludge. Almost everybody watching the experiment, developers and researchers, immediately fled the room. Those who remained, only 5 people, watched the monster slowly turn its head to the side as it started before the TV finally shut off. All records of the immersion have been destroyed, as it has thought it never happened. Nothing like it has ever been attempted since then. A year after the experiment took place, all 5 of the people who had stayed with Wayne until the TV had turned off were found dead. Each of them was confirmed as suicide. The most chilling part about the suicides, other than the fact that they all took place on the same day, was that each body was found next to the household television set, and each TV was tuned to nothing but static.
Okay, that was just Sword Art Online. In a way,
Down
it's
game, you die in your life.
yeah, which in Sword Art Online that was in the region of where you can somewhat believe it, but this is it's total BS.
Yeah.
Because with Sword Art Online, it just kind of fries your brain, which a nerve gear could do. But with this, it was actually showing all the scars that happened to them in the game, which is total BS. Because
all the scars, exactly how they died, it doesn't make sense. I mean, spontaneous human combustion. Come on.
yeah, plus that ending with the monster, or potentially killing all the people, 5 people, well, that stayed in the room is also BS because they programmed it. It shouldn't have that. Plus, they literally said it was just controlling people's dreams like a video game.
Yeah.
And
I give it like a 6 out of 10 just for like the story itself, but the realism is like a 2 out of 10.
yeah, I give it the same thing. Plus, it's also unrealistic at the time they said it was, like 2012. I'm guessing that's around the time. 2014? That's still total BS. Because technology isn't that advanced yet. At least as far as we know. Plus, it said, like, a bunch of major places knew about it, but none of the public knew about it. It never leaked out.
The Rift came out in 2012, and the story itself came out in 2014, sometime after SAO.
SAO was in 2014?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, it's old.
No, that's a lot
Here.
younger than I thought it was.
Yep, July 7th, 2012. Oh no, it's older than I thought, actually.
That's still younger than I thought it was.
That gives it time to come out with SAO 2 as well.
I thought it was early 2010. Or late 2010, I mean.
I thought too. Oh. So, what else?
We don't really have much, so we just
Yeah, I guess so.
end the podcast.
In the podcast?
Well,
what about podcasting the end?
shut up. This has been the Dark Manor Podcast. I'm Hayden.
I'm Axon.
Good night.
and good luck.